Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophets Speak. Today we will finish our study of the second book of Kings of Melachim Bet, chapter 25, Perek Chaf Hei. We just read of the destruction of the Holy Temple, the breach of the city of Jerusalem, and how the city was besieged for several years, for 3 years, by the armies of Babylon. And how eventually Nebuzaradan, who was the head of the armies of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came into the city, destroyed the city, burnt it down, smashed the walls, and left only a few of the poorest of the poor to tend to the fields so that the crops shouldn't be lost. A few people left in Judah. We're up to verse 22, and these few people, V'ha'am asher nish'ar be'eretz Yudah, Hanish'ar be'eretz Yudah, and the people who were remained within the land of Judah, Asher hish'ir Nebuchadnezzar melech Bavel, that Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, left in Babylon and did not exile to Babylon. Vayafked aleihem, and he appointed over them as a governor et Gedalyahu ben Achikam ben Shaphan. Gedalyahu, the son of Achikam, the son of Shaphan. So here, he left a governor in charge of those who remained. Vayishma'u kol sorei hachayolim hema, and the captains, the officers in charge of the various armies, they v'ha'anashim, and the men that were with them. Remember, we said that the armies attempted to escape along with King Tzidkiyahu. They were captured, but when Tzidkiyahu was captured, the people scattered. So throughout the land, presumably hiding in various places scattered throughout the land, were the remnants of the armies of Judah that had not been captured by the Babylonians, roaming throughout the deserts and countryside and mountains and caves, etc. When they heard the news, Ki hifkid melech Bavel et Gedalyahu, that Gedalyahu that was put in charge by the king of Babylon, Vayavo el Gedalyahu ha-mitzvah, they came to Gedalyahu to Mitzpah. Mitzpah was the gathering place where the people way back in the time of Joshua, when the people came into the land, gathered in Mitzpah. We had this as a gathering place in the time of Samuel. This was an old gathering place, so they gathered here again, almost reminiscent of the old glory days. V'yishmoel ben Netanya, v'yochanan ben Koreach, these are warriors being named. Yishmael, the son of Netanya, Yochanan, the son of Koreach, Usiraya ben Tanchumet, Hanetofati, V'ya'azanyahu ben Hama'achasi, Hema v'yansheim, all of these leaders of various bands of surviving Judean soldiers all came to Gedalyahu. They heard that now there was a leader. We will go and serve under him. Vayishava lahem Gedalyahu la'ansheim. And Gedalyahu swore to these men and to these leaders and their men. Vayomer lahem, and he said to them, Al tir'u me'avdei kastim. Do not be afraid of the servants of the Chaldeans. In other words, of the Babylonian soldiers that are still in the land. In other words, don't treat them like enemies. Don't continue the fight. Shavu ba'aretz, live in the land. V'ivdu es melech Bavel, and serve the king of Babylon. V'yitav lachem, and all will be fine with you. In other words, end the fighting, end the war. We lost. We should accept the fact that we are now under the thumb of the Babylonian Empire. Live in peace. In other words, don't fight a guerrilla campaign. Don't think that I'm gonna be your king and leader and reestablish a new monarchy and everything. It's over. At least that phase is over. However, these people did not like that idea. Vayihi b'chodesh hashvi, and it was in the 7th month. This is, of course, the month of Tishrei, right? Ba Yishmael ben Netanya, Yishmael, the son of Netanya ben Elishama, Mizera HaMelucha, who was of the royal family, V'asara anashim ito, and 10 men with him, Vayaku et Gedalyahu vayamos, and they assassinated Gedalyahu and killed him, and he died. Because they didn't like him kowtowing to the Babylonians, they wanted to continue the fight, despite the fact that the fight was long lost. And not only him, but they also killed those Jews that remained in his place. So Gedalyahu had set up a command post, maybe a palace of sorts, not necessarily a palace, but a home or maybe a tent or whatever it was. The Jews that were with him, that were loyal to him, they killed them. And the Babylonian officials that were there with him, the Chaldean officials, they killed them as well. And the entire nation at this point, now afraid that, oh no, now we rebelled again, the full wrath of the Babylonian army is going to come down upon us, is what they assumed. And they assumed that they had no hope anymore to stay and beg mercy of the Babylonians. So they all got up, V'sorei Chayalim, and the remaining heads of the various other bands, Vayavo'u Mitzrayim, and they went to Egypt. Ki yaru mipnei kasdim. That was the only place to go because they were afraid of the Babylonians. Egypt had been subdued but not conquered by Babylon. So Egypt's influence within this area of the Middle East had been completely wiped out. But Egypt itself remained independent, so it was a place where they could run and be, at least in theory, safe from the Babylonians. So this ended the last major group of people, of Judeans, to live in the land of Judah, until, of course, we're going to read later, not in this book, but in other books, of the people's return to rebuild the second temple. But that's a couple generations in the future. And it just so happened that in the 37th year, Legalus Yehoyachin Melech Yehuda, of the exile of Yehoyachin, the king of Judah. So Yehoyachin, remember, he was the king that was exiled first, and then Tzidkiyahu was made king. So 37 years after that, B'shneim Asar Chodesh, in the 12th month, B'esrim L'Shiva B'Chodesh, on the 27th day of the month of Adar, Nasa Evil Merodach, by this point, took over the kingdom from Nebuchadnezzar. He raised up Melech Bavel, the king of Babylon, Bishnas Malcho, in the first year of his kingdom. He raised up at Rosh Yehoyachin Melech Yudimi Beit Kela. In other words, he raised him out of the prison. So Yehoyachin had been in prison for 37 years, and Evil Merodach brought him out of prison. Presumably by this time, there was no longer any threat of Yehoyachin trying to reestablish himself as king of Judah and rebelling against Babylon. He brought him out of the of jail. Vayidaberi totovot, and he spoke nicely to him. Vayitain et kiso me'al kisei ha'melachim asher ito beBavel, and he gave him a throne above the other thrones of the other kings that were with him in Babylon. In other words, he favored him, and there was other kings that had been taken captive when their countries were conquered, and they were all kind of within Babylon being treated with some level of honor. And he put Yehoyachin's above them in a place of a little bit more honor. Vishina at Bigdei Kilo, and he changed him out of his clothing, his clothing, his jail, his prison clothes. V'yachal lechem tamid lefanav kol yimei chayav, and he gave him food to eat before the king the rest of the days of his life. So this is a tiny glimmer of hope, that the people of Judah and their leader of once upon a time being given some honor, which must have given a little breath of hope to the people, the Judeans that are now exiled in Babylon, to that maybe there's some hope for their future. Exactly what that would entail, what that would mean, remains to be seen at this time in history. Of course, we know from with our 2020 hindsight glasses what happened after this, but this is a little tiny glimmer of hope so that we don't end this book on just total disaster. And for the rest of his life, every day he got his meal, his regular meal, each and every day for the rest of his life. And this is the end of the story. This is Yehoyachin. Fast forward a couple generations, and Yehoiachin's descendant, Zerubbabel, is going to be one of the leaders of the return to Zion, return to Jerusalem, and the rebuilding of the Second Temple. But that remains in the future. This book ends on a very sad note, but with a little tiny glimmer of hope, just so that we don't end on complete sadness. It has been a pleasure reading this first and second book of Kings. So many lessons, so many things we've learned, so many stories, so many personalities, so many successes, so many failures. But ultimately, it was a kingdom that was so great once ended up being a kingdom that was destroyed due to arrogance, due to unwillingness to learn the lessons that the prophets were trying to teach the people. This was a tragic moment in the history of the Jewish people. But the people didn't give up, as we see later, as we'll see, as the books, many of which we've read together, in the books of Daniel and the books of Ezekiel. We see the visions of the future of the rebuilding. And then we see in the books of Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, we saw how the people did come back, that people started to rebuild. And history goes on. I really appreciate that you stayed with me throughout this. My next book we're going to study together, since we've been studying together now this is my 5th year doing these podcasts. We started with the book of Isaiah back in 2019. Is going to be the book of Job. It's going to be quite a change. The reason why I'm choosing the book of Job next is, number one, because I want a little bit of a change. A change from a book of narrative to more of a book of poetry, more a book of one of what we'll call the wisdom literature. Specifically, the book of Job it's a difficult book to read, but also a book with a lot of thought-provoking poetry. Another reason why I'm choosing Job next is because it most likely was written sometime in this time period, the end of the First Temple period. We'll discuss that a little more when we get to Job, but it would seem to be most appropriate to date the writing of the book of Job to approximately this period of time. Job deals with Eov in Hebrew, and Job in English deals with the issue of why sometimes good people suffer, and I hope you join me for that as well. Have a wonderful day, and I'm looking forward to moving on to the next book of the Bible that we'll study together. Take care. Have a wonderful day.